all you're doing is burning yourself out. And at the end of the day, your bank account's not changing. Your ability to support your family isn't changing. But what does change is you become a shell of a man because you're empty, right? You have nothing else to give to your family, your loved ones, except for this false promise that you're going to make it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Powerful Man Show. I am your host, Doug Holt, with my co-host, Tim, the Powerful Man Matthews. Tim, what's going on, brother?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm fantastic. You?
I'm doing great. We're just laughing because right before I hit record, you were asking why I'm bouncing back and forth, and I actually have one of those black stretch bands around my ankles, and I'm doing some gluteus medius work while we're actually at the computer chatting. So getting it done, multitasking of sorts.
Who said men couldn't multitask?
Exactly. Well, you got to get it in when you can. You know, I'm 42, and I got a young child, a 2-year-old, as well as a beautiful, active wife, and I want to. I'm always raising my standards, as we've talked about in previous episodes. And so this is just one thing I can do rather than sitting down as we have these conversations.
Awesome. I love it.
Which brings me to actually, Tim, what I want to throw on the table for today. And it's something I've been thinking about for the last, really diving into deeply in the last 24 hours, I would say. And that's unconscious commitments. So what I want to talk about is unconscious commitments. Explain to the men first what those are and ways that you can identify them. I know we won't have enough time to go through the exercises that we teach per se, because those actually take several hours. But I think it would help the men go through an introduction to what are unconscious commitments and how do you identify them?
Yeah, great topic.
Oh, thank you. Well, first off, an unconscious commitment, my definition, Tim, of an unconscious commitment are those things, obviously, that we're committed to, but we're committed to them unconsciously. So said another way, we just don't realize that we've committed to these things. And oftentimes the way that we look at these are things that are occurring in our life as repeating patterns. That's also how you identify them. Repeating patterns that we do not like. So I'll give you a few of them. If you're overweight, you are unconsciously committed to being fat. If you are broke, you are unconsciously committed to being broke. If you are in a bad relationship, you are unconsciously committed to being in that bad relationship, especially if you keep getting into them. So you get the idea. These are patterns of things that keep coming up. If you're tired, you're unconsciously committed to being tired. And oftentimes when I bring this up to the men, they get pissed, right? They get upset. Like, what do you mean I'm not, I'm unconsciously committed to being broke? My boss or my job, you don't understand my industry, Doug, or what have you. But the truth is, at some level, we've committed to the outcomes. What you see in your life right now, for the most part, right? There's drastic exceptions, but if you're listening to this, my guess is that you're not one of these exceptions. But for the most part, what you see today when you look in the mirror, look at your bank account, look at your relationships, is a result of those things that you're committed to, your standards. You're a result of these unconscious commitments. And so, Tim, let's go back and forth a little bit on this episode, because I know that this is something that I've spent a lot of time on, and I'm sure you have too. And we certainly talk to the men about this at various levels, depending on where they're at. But how do you identify or define unconscious commitments?
So this is something that we do in the men with the do with the men in the activation method right at the beginning. When we lead them through the truth, there are 4 stages: detach, release, remember, reinforce. And detach, all about detaching from the unconscious commitment. Now, Doug, you're just bouncing back and forth and finding out how to look at you and laugh at you.
Perfect time to get some exercise in while you're talking.
If you guys could see this, he's on my screen going back and forth from left to right with a smile on his face, hands together, obviously very smug and pleased that he's multitasking and loving the topic. And I'm trying my best to remain focused. So it's something we do with the guys during the early stages, because until you uncover this, then it's going to plague any of your efforts. And in my opinion, it's one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why you or anyone doesn't get the results they desire. Now, I love what you were saying there about, if you are not eating healthily, then you have an unconscious commitment to being fat. If you, whatever way in which you're basically sabotaging yourself, you have an unconscious commitment to that particular outcome. Completely agree. Now, the way in which I like to take this a step further is, what is the unconscious commitment that's going on underneath there? Because that's the unconscious commitment to the behavior and to the outcome. And what I've found what we found with the men is that often they have an unconscious commitment to a particular belief that's underneath that. And there's usually one or two key beliefs. And the unconscious commitment, the belief rather, might be that I am not good enough. Or it might be that if my life is easy, then I won't be loved, for example. They may have watched as their father pushed and hustled and forced and grinded, and that was the definition of what it meant to be a man and a successful man, and they fear that if they break the mold, then they're going to be outcast. And it's always about bringing it back to what is the unconscious commitment around the belief, that those one or two key beliefs that basically running your life. Because at the end of the day, our need to stay consistent with who we think we are is the strongest force in anyone's psychology and personality.
Well, it's absolutely true. And I can share one of mine that I've identified throughout the years as a repeating pattern that keeps coming up, or has kept coming up for me, is, Tim, I remember I was an athlete in school and in college, playing soccer. And I remember distinctly when somebody essentially just told me, "Oh, you're just a dumb jock." Right? And ooh, did that burn, right? I just thought about it, and I actually didn't play for a year. Right? I took a year off just to focus on academics. And I actually had good grades and did well, relatively well, B's and C's and A's. I was all over the gamut, I guess, but mostly about a B average for the most part. And then to top it off, I remember distinctly having a conversation with a landlord of all people, and him renting me the place. And actually, he rented it to a girlfriend of mine at the time. And we had a good conversation, and he was definitely an intellect. Right? Very out of shape, very intellectual. And one of the reasons that he rented to her, we're in Santa Barbara, California, which is an extremely competitive rental market, was these conversations that he and I had. And it was a conversation over philosophy. And he made a comment, I bounced back, and we just started talking about philosophy. And I actually was studying philosophy on my own at the time. So long story short, we're moving her in. I had a tank top on, and I was this time, I'm young, worked in the fitness space. And so I was very, very good shape. And he looked at me as I was carrying something, stopped and said, "Oh, I didn't think you were a meathead." And then turned around and kept walking away. And Tim, that stuck with me. And I remember thinking that and always wondering, like, wow, this guy just totally judged me based on the way I physically looked. And for a while there, I was unconsciously committed to hiding my athletic physique at the time. And I wouldn't wear a tank top, and I didn't figure it out until later that really what I was trying to do was make sure that nobody ever looked at me that way again. Nobody ever took my intellect for granted just because I happened to be athletic. Now, I know someone listening to this probably thinks, well, that's stupid, but that was my reality at the time, right? We all have these unconscious commitments that we make for one reason or the other. But my belief running in the background was in order to be taken seriously for my mind, the things that I've learned and what have you, that I couldn't be both fit, like extremely athletic and fit, and be smart at the same time. So I had to pick one path. And at the time, I decided, you know what? I'm just going to be very athletic playing sports, but not worry about the aesthetics portion of it. And I'm just going to focus on the intellect.
Wow. What a cool realization.
Yeah, it's so, and it's, the crazy part, because you and I have talked about this, because going back and forth with my current goals with my fitness several times. In fact, we were chatting about it earlier today via Voxer. But it's so clear to me, you know how you have conversations, even if it's a one comment, and this was 20 years ago, but it's so clear as almost if it happened yesterday. That's one of the ways for me when I'm coaching the men that I can easily identify if that's something that's running the show in the background, right? Because if it was that clear as if it was yesterday, then that still is part of your programming, right? Otherwise it wouldn't be, because there's most things, 99.9% of the things that are said to you or done with you, you forget. But the ones you remember matter. And when they matter, they're running the show. So for the guys listening to this and the guys that go through our program, of course, you're constantly peeling back these layers and reworking it. I always make that analogy of, it's like a Britney Spears song that you never liked, but you're in the shower and you get out and you're like, oh crap, you start singing in your head, or at least, a sonnet. It's not because you like it. It's just because it's in your programming now. It's been repeated so many times in your mind, consciously or subconsciously, that it's become a program. In order to get it out, so to speak, you obviously, there's exercises and work that we do through the activation method. And then also more advanced stuff like we're going to be doing in Morocco for the men in the Brotherhood when we go on the retreat, which is going to be money mindset. But there's exercises you can do. You need to reprogram that, and you need to play a song to kind of get the Britney Spears song, so to speak, out of your head. So you got to play a more positive message or affirmation, so to speak, more often. So it overpowers and then reinforces that new empowering belief, not the limiting belief.
Wow. Yeah, so true. I mean, for me, the main two for me that I remember, my dad telling this story of how when he was 15 or 16, I can't remember the exact age, he left school. And the day after leaving school, he was working in Leeds Market, peeling cauliflowers for 50p a week or 50p a month, or I don't know, some crazy rate. I can't remember what it was. But the whole philosophy of the story that he wanted to drum home to me and told me time and time and time again was that, you've got to work hard to be successful. You've got to work hard for what it is that you want. And, I love the work ethic that instilled in me. However, I had an unconscious commitment to life then being a struggle and life being hard and having to work hard. So I hustled and pushed and forced and, ground it out. And I also then listened to certain messages within personal development from certain people that were telling me that, that was the way to do it and to persevere and, to be motivated and all the rest of it. And I didn't need motivation. I mean, I had that in spades. That was like, just putting me on steroids, even though I was already, absolutely huge in that department. It wasn't needed. And all that then led to was a lot of unfulfillment, a lot of burnout. I used to get burnt out regularly. And I paid a price in relationships as well, and my own personal happiness. Health went out the window. I then struggle with, I'd struggle with money, but for other reasons. And I'll go into that one in a moment. But that was my first unconscious commitment. My unconscious commitment was to having success be hard. And the belief there was that, it's got to be a struggle. And the second one was that the unconscious commitment was it showed up in lots of different areas in terms of the actual action. But the belief that was there was that I just wasn't good enough. And the memories that I had around that were a lot around when I was really young. And I don't think it was bullying. Looking back, you may categorize it as bullying, but I don't think it was bullying. But I remember a particular instance when I was very young. I must have been below the age of, I don't know, 6 or 7. And we were playing football on the neighbour's drive, so playing soccer on the neighbour's drive, and I was in goal. They put me in goal. And there was 3 of them there. There was the 2 boys who I was friends with. One was an elder brother, and also their dad, which is, as I tell this story, is a bit weird. Because what they then did was they put me in goal, but then just started shooting the ball at me really, really hard.
How
And of
old were
course,
these
I
kids?
wasn't going to be able to save it because I was about a 6-year-old kid and the balls were just, flying at me and hitting me and they were laughing. And then came up for this name for me. I think they called me Mothman or something like Timothy Mothman. And they kept saying how weak I was and, other bits and pieces. And then I looked for ways throughout my life to kind of prove that right. And that then showed up in money because I'd undercharged for my services. It showed up in relationships because then I'd put myself worth and been able to attract and pull the women that all the guys wanted. It'd show up in business. It'd show up all sorts. But the unconscious commitment there was the commitment to just not being enough, not being good enough. And that played out for a long, long time in many different areas. And that combined with having to work hard and life being a struggle, they're two lethal unconscious commitments to have in place. Can you imagine the kind of life that I experienced because of those?
Hey guys, I want to interrupt this episode because I want to talk to you about something important. We put together a case study on how almost 300 men have taken control of their lives. They're 4Xing their business revenues and they're having more connected and intimate sex, all without sacrificing their relationships or their health by using the activation method. Now, a lot of you have contacted us and they want to know how they're doing it. We put together this short 11-minute case study just for you so you can see how these entrepreneurs are achieving this level of success. To get this case study, all you have to do is go over to thepowerfulman.com/11. Yep, that's 11. And you can get the case study right now. All right, it's only 11 minutes and it's going to show you exactly how these men have done it. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, you think about that. First of all, I can picture you in goal, as this little kid getting shelled by the ball. And
Why are you laughing?
there's a little part of me that wants to do it to you now. And when I say
I can picture you in there and you're smiling. Come on.
Well, you think about all the things that we do now to people, the comments we make, the way we treat our kids, our family. And ironically, we talked about the Alpha Reset. A lot of men get clarity about things that they're doing that are kind of, pelting the soccer ball at the people they love, and giving them. But it's interesting, Tim, when we look at this dichotomy like you have of these belief systems that get us in, it's almost like an eddy, right? So when you go down, if you don't know what an eddy is, if you ever go whitewater rafting, you want to make sure you know what one is. But an eddy is almost like a spiral of water that keeps going around in a circular motion. And things get stuck in the eddy a lot. If you get popped out in whitewater rafting, you don't want to get stuck in an eddy because you're going to spin around over and over again to eventually it does shoot you out. But, it's like almost like Groundhog's Day, right? Again and again and again, you're going through the same thing. And when we have competing unconscious beliefs or unconscious commitments, it's even worse. So I've got to work hard to make money, commitment one, right? So grinding it out, which was being sold. I love that it's changing now in some of the dogmas out there that you're hearing from the talking heads, so to speak. Work hard, grind it out, get home and work from, midnight to 4 a.m. on your side hustle and 5 a.m. to, 10 p.m. on your business. So there's that, work hard, and then I don't deserve it. So you don't make the money. So all you're doing is burning yourself out. And at the end of the day, your bank account's not changing. Your ability to support your family isn't changing. But what does change is you become a shell of a man because you're empty, right? You have nothing else to give to your family, your loved ones, except for this false promise that you're going to make it. If I just work harder, then I'll make it. You get that unconscious commitment, that voice in the back of your head saying, I'm not worthy, so you don't make more money.
Yeah. Or for me, I was making more money, but then I'd find ways to spend it.
Yeah.
I'd find ways to waste it. It was almost like what I'd then do is I'd spend it to prove to other people that I could make it. That then put me back in a position where I had to make it again. So then I could be the hero and make it. So then everyone would then look at me again. It was this vicious cycle.
And it happens. And this is exactly why I want access to the Powerful Man bank account. No. No, but you've done a lot of work around that, and you can see it in the way you do now, because for the things that you do and the charitable aspects that you commit to, you do it and you reinvest in yourself. And this is just to clarify the message of where you've come from. You are going away for 5 days to network with other very high level business professionals in a very exclusive group. And you've taken that money, not spent it on, junk and expensive watches and clothes, but you've reinvested that money in your own growth. And I think that shows that you've changed your unconscious commitment from showing off how much money you can spend, but more so how much you can invest in yourself. And that's what we want to talk about to these guys, right? So if you're listening to this, one of the questions you may be asking yourself is, well, what are my unconscious commitments? And so one of the ways, guys, that you can establish those things is realizing, first, taking a very radical and honest and raw look at your life as it is today. Where are you? Where are you today? Are you where you want to be? Odds are, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not a member or of the Brotherhood or the Powerful Man, because those guys still listen, because we talk about these podcasts with them quite often, but the chances are you're not exactly where you want to be. And so you want to look at, what are those unconscious commitments you're making? What's that underlying current or belief system that's running the show? Are you, when you look in your areas of self, wealth, health, business, right? Where are you in relationships? Where are you in all 5 of those areas, what we call the 5 territories? Where are you in those territories? And, are you where you want to be? And if you're not, what are you unconsciously committed to? And Tim, one of the biggest things that I do to do this, to figure this out for myself, are, what are my 3 biggest complaints in all of the 5 territories, right? Identify my 3 biggest complaints in the 5 territories, and then move on that.
Yeah, great point. I mean, for me, now I'm aware of them, it's much easier for me to be able to do work on them. However, I found I didn't know these patterns were in my life for so long. I really didn't. There were a few key moments in my life that stand out to me that really fueled my discovery of these. One of them was the fact that somebody once said to me, a very close friend at the time, I was sharing with him some of the workflow that I was experiencing and some things I was going through, and it was like, wow, it seems to me like you don't feel good enough. You're just trying to prove yourself. And when he said that, it just landed. I don't know why or where I was in my life at that time or what was going on, but it really, really landed. And it had me really reflect on how I really felt and got really real with myself, and took some real inventory of the results I was experiencing in my life, the journey that I was on, and the patterns that I kept on repeating. And then the second key moment was in hiring a coach, because you go to these people for reasons because they have a proven track record and they're professionals in what they do. And for me, that really accelerated things. I shared with them, I was very real and honest about my reasons for hiring this person and, what I was experiencing in my life at that time. And, it was so easy. Looking back, it was so easy for them to just point things out. I mean, any great coach asks questions, doesn't he? And they asked some really great questions of me that really had me realizing some key things about my life and my journey up until that point as well. And it just blew me away when I started to see how my journey, everything was just interlinked. Everything was interlinked and kept coming back to these 2 main unconscious commitments. Everything. The way in which I tolerated in my relationship, the way in which I then stayed in it, the drugs that I took, the money, everything came back to these 2 things. And it was just astonishing. It really was. And at the end of the day, we can't see our own blind spots. We just can't. And this is why the men, when the men experience this realization for themselves, it's it's amazing to see the look on their face and how it takes the breath away, and they're like speechless because the penny's dropped, and all they then go and do is journal for hours and hours and hours and get all of this out and onto paper. And that really is where the gold is, and that realization, and then making the necessary adjustments moving forwards. That's obviously the key as well. And, the reality is, Doug, I'm sure for you, these commitments for me still come up from time to time. They're not unconscious anymore, which is a great thing. They don't have control of me anymore, which is another great thing. And I'm able to spot them a lot faster and overcome them much quicker and with much more grace and ease. So I'm not sidetracked like I used to be. I mean, I wasn't even sidetracked before. I was completely living a shaman of existence, really, compared to what I now know to be true for me. So, yeah, I mean, if you do know what yours are and they are coming up for you from time to time, don't beat yourself up. You're a human being. It's going to happen. Have the flexibility and grace with yourself to be able to see it, acknowledge it, don't judge it, let it pass on by, and get back on the path of your truth and get back on the horse and take action in alignment with what your truth really is.
Oh, man, it's so true. And you can see this. And that's why, I journaled about this today. And why I'm grateful to have you in my life is no matter how much work we do as men, the guardrails we put in place, so to speak, in our lives, we need that coach, that person to look at us objectively, because you can't see the forest from the trees all the time. And it's something you and I talk about. I mean, it's obviously what we provide for the men in the brotherhood. And it's also something that it's great that you and I go back on. You and I have started an accountability practice where every day we message each other to see if the other person's on track, right? See where we are. Are we missing? Are we on there? And that level of accountability also puts what we want, our standards, so to speak, into plain view, right? It's in the conversation. When you're in the conversation of what you want versus what you don't want, it's very different, right? That conversation, that outcome is very different. So one of the other things, Tim, I want to leave these guys with is when you are identifying these unconscious commitments, notice how when you write them down, where you feel it in your body, right? Where are you feeling? Do you get tense when you write it down or you think it? Do you get a queasy feeling? Do you get kind of an unease in your body or your stomach when you write them down? Or more appropriately, what we have them do, and I wish we could go through the whole exercise on this, but we just don't have the time. But when you write that unconscious commitment down and then write the opposite. So for example, in order to be taken seriously for my intellect, I cannot look fit. And that was mine, right? So when I write the opposite, right, I can be both aesthetically fit and be taken seriously for my intelligence. Where does that show up for me, right? If it shows up as uneasy or tense or doesn't sit right with me, then I know I'm still holding on to something, right? Then I just know that I have yet to let that go. And so that's a great indicator, a great starting point for these. And you may have, chances are you're going to have more than 20 unconscious commitments, but you may have quite a few more. And as you peel back the layers, right, you may discover more underneath that. And that's a great thing because you're kind of like Indiana Jones doing an archaeological investigation into your own subconscious, into your own mind, and finding out what that programming is. And just like you update your iPhone or your Android or whatever smartphone you have, you update that software. It's time to update your software. It's time for a reset. It's time to get yourself a reset. My Windows computer, it's Control-Alt-Delete. And, you guys have Macs. You guys can figure that on your own. But are you ready for a reset in your own life? Are you ready to reset, reboot, and reclaim your power? And if you are, I invite you to come to one of our Alpha Resets and check that out. Because I do think, Tim, that's the most powerful way. And the Alpha Reset is an intense retreat. And to get there, right, to get to an Alpha Reset, one, you have to apply 2, you have to be obviously accepted. And 3, you have to go through 8 weeks of intensive coaching with our team and with another group of men just like you. And that's just to get to the alpha reset. And after that, that's when the control, alt, delete, reboot happens. And that's why we call it the alpha reset.
So true. So true. I love the whole Indiana Jones analogy as well. Whenever you use that, I always smile. It's so cool. I
love it too, man, because you think about investigating and, I'm an adventurer. I love to adventure. And if anybody knows my lifestyle that I live, it's all about adventure. And go and adventure in your own mind, in your own soul. Just no greater adventure in the world to me. Tim, that's all we got for time today. And as a wrap up, so gentlemen, are you ready to reboot? If you are, I invite you, as we invite all the men, we never tell them what to do. I invite you to join us. Get on a call and see if it's the right fit for you. Not everybody's accepted, so we do have an application process. We want to make sure it's the right men in the right place. And if you're listening to this, odds are that's you. And I invite you to be there. So go ahead and reboot your alpha, and we'll see you at the next Alpha Reset.